Hello and welcome to the ParentNet podcast by Focus on the Family Singapore. In each podcast, we'll be tackling questions that parents are asking about family life, parenting, work life, and so much more. So join us on this journey of discovery together.
Hello and welcome to the ParentNet podcast. My name is June and I'm your host for this episode. The Ministry of Health found that the highest proportion of people with poor mental health were from the 18 to 29 age group at 25.3%. This was from the recent National Population Health Survey, which released its findings in September last year. Now that's about 1 in 4 young people. In the last decade, the public's awareness of mental health conditions has increased, while the stigma over seeking help has reduced. Deputy Prime Minister Lawrence Wong recently announced in February that mental health and well-being is a key priority on our national agenda. However, even with the increased awareness and avenues of help available, many parents still find themselves experiencing emotions like guilt and anxiety when they find out about their child's mental health conditions. As such, some young people may face difficulty in getting timely treatment due to such fear and stigma still held by parents. So why is it so hard for parents to accept that their child has a mental health condition? Joining me to explore this issue is Alex Yeo, Acting Executive Director of Caring for Life and co-founder of Mental Connect. He will be sharing his thoughts with us today on this topic. Welcome, Alex.
Hi, thank you for having me here. I think this is really a great honor for me to be here to share about this mental health work and also the importance of awareness, because over time, this mental health landscape has been improving in terms of this effort of increasing awareness and people having a more positive attitude. But there's still a gap, and this will be an ongoing effort here. So my work really focuses on this area of informal care setting. So there's a difference between formal care and informal care, where formal care are your professionals, for example, the counsellors, the psychologists, psychiatrists, etc. And the informal care are your family members, friends, and other relational positions, for example, teachers, the employers, etc. Right? So what we came to realize is that at the first point when the person needs to seek help, they tend to go to the informal care first.
Right.
So our work involves in equipping them and also addressing their mindset such that it is correct towards mental health treatment and mental health support. So in my current full-time job, I'm an Acting Executive Director of Caring for Life, where we are a suicide prevention charity, and we work closely with many other partners as a service linkage. When a carer, so for example, a friend, a family member, a supervisor, teacher, you name it, if let's say they encounter someone that's in distress, first of all, how do you identify that this person may have suicide ideation? Because oftentimes it's not something they are very open to share. But they are more willing to share things like, I'm feeling very stressed, I'm very sad, I'm very angry. So those are the ones that you hear it. But how do you read between the line that they may potentially have suicide ideation? So that's one. And after that, how do you bring them to the right care and support? So that's what Caring for Life does. And at the same time, also the co-founder of Mental Connect, where the whole idea of Mental Connect is there is help out there. And it is not just limited to your conventional treatments like counseling and therapy and seeing a psychiatrist. Because sometimes that might be quite scary for anyone to go for the first time. But it's all about getting started. So who can they talk to? That's what Mental Connect is all about.
Well, thanks for getting us acquainted with this topic on mental health. And I picked up a few terms from what you were briefly sharing. So you mentioned something like informal care and informal care support rather than going straight to the professionals, for example. And you also talked about some of the support system and the support network around a young person. So including the parents, the teachers. So I'm kind of curious about that because I think many of our listeners are parents themselves and some are even educators. So I wonder if you could shed a bit of light as to what could be going on in a parent's mind, when he or she first encounters the possibility of their child having a mental health struggle.
First of all, we need to acknowledge that it can be quite scary to even consider that possibility. That's where sometimes you get into denial, where perhaps this is just a phase that it may grow out of, or perhaps this is due to something more situational, maybe because they are too stressed from studies, or maybe they have been bullied by their friends. So they just limit it to that as a possibility. So if they get out of that situation, things will get better. Or perhaps they just do not realize that this might be beyond that, right? That needs some form of professional mental health intervention support. So that's where they get into denial. But at the same time, I think we also need to acknowledge that potential stigma where, for example, if let's say the other people, like the other family members, if they know about it, how would they feel? If let's say their classmates know about it, how would they feel? Or how would the child herself or himself feel if he or she realized that they may have a mental condition? So there's that stigma as well, and it can be quite challenging, especially if you love this person deeply, to first acknowledge that potentially have mental health condition and may potentially need further support. And it might even affect or change the life trajectory after that. And this is quite a big milestone for anyone, not just parents, to cross, especially when it comes to someone that you care about. With that in mind, this is why sometimes you will see this thing, what we call the treatment gap, whereby this person has identified sign of distress or other mental health symptoms that definitely need some form of mental health professionals intervention, but they're not seeking help at the immediate moment. And that's where it begins to drag. And sometimes you can even drag for years for the parents to pray and hope that things will get better. Or sometimes they might perhaps engage in their form teacher to have some discussion on what they observe. But that's where it stopped and just continue on. And so I think we need to acknowledge that it can be quite a frightening thought, right? At the end of the day, for the parents to realize that, hey, my child, whom I love deeply, may have mental health condition and may need mental health support.
So you mentioned the fear that can be very deeply seated in a parent's heart, simply because the child is so dear and so precious to them, right? And then you also mentioned the stigma, the worry about what other family members might feel or think about this situation, if there really is a mental health issue involved, right? I'm just wondering, how then can we help ourselves to move beyond this so that we don't unknowingly create a treatment gap, the term that you mentioned, and that we can actually find timely help for our child? Because from what I hear and I learn in my course of work, it seems that sometimes the earlier you find intervention and the earlier you find help, it may prevent the problem from getting worse or from snowballing into something else. So wondering if you have any thoughts about that.
I think the first thing we need to do is not jump to conclusion or assume the worst of the situation first. I also observe that many of the parents, or any of us actually, will go online to search for information, to try and have a better understanding. But when it comes to mental health condition, it can be quite scary, because when you read the different signs and symptoms, then you get into this checkbox mode, like, oh, is that this, is that this, is that this, oh my gosh, is my child having this mental health condition? And it looks very serious. So that's where the fear sets in, and that there's this delay or anxiety, right, of what's going to happen to my child. So I think first thing first is don't jump into conclusion, don't assume the worst, and just start talking to a professional. Or if, let's say, you're not comfortable bringing your child to a physical center, perhaps you might want to invite a friend that you know who are trained in this, make it a more informal setting, just to come together, have a conversation, and let the friend, right, to just share what they observe, and then from there continue to make that decision in a more progressive manner. So I think that will help to reduce that fear that I need to send my child, for example, immediately to the hospital. It's not necessary that also. But the whole point here is get started and continue to journey with the child and continue to adapt and to find out what is the right resources and what is the right approach for the child as we continue the journey. I think that in itself is quite important. And we also need to acknowledge that there's also a difference between displaying mental health conditions or symptoms versus mental illness. Because as we assume the worst, we automatically think that, hey, my child might have mental illness. It's not necessarily the case as well. So we want to avoid getting into a self-diagnosis mode and start seeking professional help.
Okay, so avoid Google so that it doesn't spark whatever anxious thoughts in your head, and also avoid this diagnosis that you mentioned, pre-diagnosing on our own. And you also mentioned something about tapping on some maybe friendship networks that you have, just to have that open conversation, right? How would that take place, and should the parent then sit in, for example, so that he or she is present? Or does it depend on the relationship, the context, etc.?
I don't have a perfect answer to that as to what is an ideal setting. But I think it's still about getting started and continue to observe what works best. Everyone is different. That also means that every child is different. The child may even display different set of behaviors when they are with someone they don't know versus when they're in a safe space like in a home. So there is really no ideal setting, but I think the principle here is really about getting started and share with this person what you have observed in the past and just see from there what is the right help to seek. All right. I think that is more important. But of course, I do believe in the importance of creating a safe space nevertheless, especially for the child. So that's where they need to be flexible and also to see under what circumstances, like maybe, for example, it has to be done in a home, or maybe they could meet in a cafe, whatever that works best so that the child will be comfortable as well to open up. I think that is more important.
You talked about safe space. I'm kind of keen to explore a little bit on that. As parents, we often hear like, you must be a safe space for your child, you must create a safe space for your child, right? And yet at the same time, sometimes as parents, we are also overwhelmed with our own emotions at times and also very worried and anxious about the situation, as I would imagine if this comes up in your home, right? So what are some things that we should not do, we should avoid doing so that our child can feel safe?
Okay, let me start with what they should do first.
Okay, do's and don'ts. Yep, sure.
Self-care. I once come across this very interesting statement, which I do believe quite deeply. You know how we always tell ourselves we need to care for ourselves?
Yes.
Right? Self-care, take care of ourselves. But there's this very interesting view that we need to take care of ourselves so that we can care for others well. So I think we need to start from there first. My board member, Dr. Joseph Leong, he's also our advisor as well. He once shared this acronym about self-care called HALT. HALT. Are you hungry? Are you angry? Are you lonely? And are you tired? So from there, once you identify which you are, then you know what to do in response for your self-care. And only through that, then that's where you have a better headspace to care for others. So I think that's where we should start first. So then when we come to what not to do, to be very honest, it can be quite challenging. Because again, we are looking at someone that you love deeply. Yeah? And if let's say the child reacts in an emotional way, so for example, anger, outbursts, or they might say certain statements that is hurtful. And for all you know, they could be intentionally wanting to hurt you. We need to learn to discern, is it the child that is speaking? Or is it the stress or the situation that's speaking? It's two different things. So only when we have that mindset, that will help us to better process what's going on. And then that will help us to manage our own emotion as well, right? In response to it, so that we ourselves don't respond in an emotional way, but to be able to understand what exactly is going on, right? And we can empathize. From there, continue to build trust, even if the child is hurting you from the things that they do or say. Challenging, but I think it's necessary. So that's why, to me, if we start on self-care first, it will help you to do or what not to do later as well.
Yeah, so true. I really like that tip to discern whether it's your child speaking or is it the anxiety or the stress speaking. And I think it kind of applies to us as parents, right? As we reflect on our own actions or our own reactions to our child when he or she does something that we don't like. Because sometimes is it really us? Like this caring mom or this loving dad? Or is it in that moment that frustration and anger speaking, right? So it's kind of similar in that sense. And I think it's a very helpful tip. And it definitely helps us not to take things personally, right? And not to then overreact based on what the child said or did.
Yeah. Even on that note, we also need to remember that we are human beings. So sometimes we might make mistakes as well. And not to feel too overburdened by the mistakes they have made. Perhaps the way they have reacted wasn't so ideal and they feel guilty about it. Nothing wrong in reflecting, but we also need to seek help ourselves as well to know how do I do things better later. But making mistakes is simply part of the process. No one is perfect in knowing how to react in every single circumstance and situation. We all learn, and there is no one-size-fits-all solution. You might have attended many different types of mental health programs. For example, personally, I am psychologically first aid trained under Red Cross. I also have attended courses like ASSIST, Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training. And even with those as background, I cannot claim that I am necessarily a subject matter expert in all situations. No such thing. So that's where we continue to learn and we continue to make mistakes and we continue to hear from others on how they do it as well, so that we become better as a carer and a supporter in our community.
Yeah, and it's all part of self-care, right?
It
Just
is.
being able to apply that same compassion to
Yes.
ourselves, even when we make a mistake with our children. Yeah. I'm kind of interested to find out a little bit more about the informal resources that you mentioned. I think in an article published in Salt and Light, you talked about Mental Connect as being founded to inform people that there are a lot of mental health resources beyond counseling, beyond visiting a psychiatrist, and that the care continuum involves many different parts, including psychoeducation and community care. I'm just wondering if you could share a little bit more about that so that in the event we really need help, we can know where to go and to be able to seek that help.
Yeah. Maybe I'll start off by sharing my own personal example, which kind of led me, together with my co-founder as well, to think about why we wanted to create Mental Connect. So I have received counseling myself by Fei Yue, and they did a wonderful job, really. But for me to even come to that point, it was quite challenging. Because if you look at existing publicity materials, even to today, when it comes to mental health, the most direct help they will direct you to often is either crisis hotline or call any of the non-profit agencies, right, to seek help or counseling. And they will always go along the way whereby, oh, it's okay to seek help. There's no shame in seeking help. And I agree with them. But we also need to remember that for the first time when you're going to seek help, that mental barrier can be quite big. Before I decided to step into a FSC to seek my first counseling, there was actually a lot of thoughts that went through my head. For example, what are they going to ask me about? What is it like? Am I really that comfortable sharing this problem? Will other people know about it? And how would they view? And these other people could include my colleagues, could be my friends, my family members. Because when I decided to seek help, actually no one else knew about it. But what if they do? So there were a lot of thoughts that went through my head. And in fact, I remember sitting outside FSC for about half an hour because I didn't have the courage to walk into one. But I'm glad I did. And as I continued to journey and find the right counselor for me, so later when I come across Fei Yue, this particular counselor, it was so helpful. I cannot imagine what it'll be like if I did not go through that session. That's how impactful it was. But I think this also illustrates the importance of seeking that first help. Unfortunately, right now, people still have that fear or stigma of going to a counseling session or therapy. And sometimes I will still hear statements like, how would that help me? It's just one person talking to another person. They'll use the word talk therapy as if it's not a good thing. And they might even have those previous, unfortunately, negative experiences, like they may have met professionals that wasn't helpful, and therefore that deters them from seeking other help further. So I think the whole point of Mental Connect is to illustrate that there is help beyond just counseling, therapy. I'm not endorsing any particular one that's more effective, but it's really about showing them that this whole array of help. So for example, if let's say you are not comfortable talking one-to-one with a counselor, perhaps they want to start opening up through alternative methods like art therapy, music therapy, just to get started, just to start exploring their emotional issue, and from there, see what comes next and continue a journey and build on it. Or even after you have received professional services like counseling, therapy, psychiatric help, there's actually more to it after that. For example, support group. Because social support is an also essential process in any recovery as well. Beyond just family members and friends, in a well-facilitated support group, you have people with similar life experience where they can relate and realize that they're not alone. That is also essential in terms of recovery. So Mental Connect is really about showing the whole array. We are not endorsing any one of them, but we want to tell people, especially for the carers, to get started and see what works for this child or this person. And from there, start journeying. So that's why I created this Mental Connect.
Wow, thanks for sharing. I think it's helpful to know that there are resources and help available. And sometimes we really do need that courage to take the first step, and acknowledging that, yes, there's all sorts of fears, all sorts of thoughts running through your head as you shared through your personal example. But just being able to find the right person, or just being able to talk to someone sometimes can make a real difference to how we view the situation, to how we view the options that we have. And that's really valuable from a parent's point of view. Yeah, especially when it can seem so desperate and dark at times. So thanks for sharing. Sad to say that I have to let you go, Alex. But can I just ask, if you have any parting words or even advice that you would like to share with our listeners out there?
As parents and fellow carers, you're definitely the children's best source of support. In fact, more so than your professional intervention like teacher counselors and therapists, because at the end of the day, they spend the most time with you. They may seek regular sessions with the professional, but in between that, you are the child's support. So it is important that we approach this mental health condition and recovery with the right mindset, and also not to be ashamed of seeking help, whether for the child, even for yourself, because we talked about the importance of self-care, so that eventually you have the best chance of eventual recovery, and to acknowledge that this is going to take time, be patient, but recovery is possible.
Well said. Thanks for sharing today. I really hope that parents out there, and including caregivers as well, will be encouraged to find the support that they need just by taking that step towards treatment and towards getting help. So thank you once again, Alex.
Thank you.
We have come to the end of this episode. So for listeners tuning in, we hope that you have gained fresh insights and also helpful tips towards approaching any mental health struggle that your child may have. For more parenting resources, do remember to visit our website at family.org.sg. For listeners who are interested to find out more about caring for life and Mental Connect, do check out the websites. Do keep tuning in to the ParentNet podcast as well to learn and grow in your parenting journey. So until next time, have a great week ahead.